Hey guys, what's up? Brent Calmer from Blue Water VST. Thanks for joining me for this video. This week it's Krypt, which, as the name would suggest, is one of the most terrifying ensembles in the Reaktor factory library. It is a 6-channel granular sampler that uses an intelligent pattern generation algorithm to deliver beats and grooves that sound like they're from another dimension, or one might say back from the dead. So we're going to take a look at this, and I just want to show you 3 things that will help get you going. Krypt is an extraordinarily complex instrument or ensemble, even by Reaktor standards, and so to try and cover it all would be a recipe for being overwhelmed. I'm just going to share with you 3 things that I think will really help get you going on your own explorations with this. So let's start in. Okay, first things first. The Krypt ensemble actually consists of 5 separate instruments. These include the sequencer at top, the sampler in the middle, the filler, which is the intelligent pattern generation algorithm part of Krypt here at bottom right, a snapshot management tool in the middle of the bottom row, and a song sequencer, which is essentially a snapshot sequencer here at bottom left. Now, Krypt does not load with a snapshot master instrument. In other words, none of these instruments will change the snapshots of the other instruments. So if I load a different snapshot, say for the sampler, you notice that none of the other snapshots change. This is where this snapshot management tool comes in. It allows you to change the snapshots at the level of the sequencer here by using this rightmost knob, or the leftmost knob, excuse me, of the sampler here by using the right knob. And you see that as I'm turning this knob, the snapshots are changing in real time. Or what I like best is changing both the sequencer and the sampler. This allows you to hear these snapshots as they were originally imagined by the sound designer. So if we get these going, we can just move through these very fluidly. It's very slick. So this should be your first port of call, because this will allow you to get your head around some of Krypt's sounds, how they're designed, and to use as a starting point for your own explorations. Now you hear that as I stop the system clock, there's this kind of long release. This happens sometimes in Krypt, and a good thing to do is just to toggle the audio engine on and off. That will get rid of that. That's just a handy tip. But what you probably also noticed is that as I got these moving, some of these snapshots, you see these bars jumping around in both the sampler control and effect control parts of the interface. And you're probably wondering, what is causing this and what do these mean? That's the second thing we're going to look at, and that's next. Now, it's really modulation that gives Krypt its signature sound. What happens here is that we have a sequencer that is triggering not just hits, but using the velocity of those hits to trigger modulation. So if we look at channel 2 on its own here, we see that we have hits of varying modulation, or varying velocity. Those velocities will modulate various parameters in the sampler control and effect control sections. And these parameters in the sampler control section include sample selection here at top, sample pitch one below, sample speed below that, and grain size below that. And you see that we have different levels for each of these parameters for each of the 6 channels. Now, to get a real sense for what's going on here, let's solo one of these channels. The way to do this is to select the channel you wish to solo in the effect control section and click on that dot underneath it. And now we have soloed channel 2. If you do the same thing in the sampler control section, it will mute that channel. I'm not quite sure why it's set up that way, but there you have it. And now we are going to listen to channel 2 on its own. Here we go. I'm going to drop this reverb level down just to get a drier signal. So a lot of interesting things happening here. If we look at the sample selection for channel 2, we see that in fact this bar is moving up and down based on the range or the modulation depth that we have here. Now if I bring up this range, you'll see that sample selection is changing for channel 2, right? It's much higher now. But we can also alter the phase at which this is working. This is essentially changing the range of the sample map that we're pulling from. So for each of these different velocities, we're getting different samples. Now, to bring this into bolder relief, I could just draw a downward slope here. And you hear it moving through those samples, and you see the bar is moving to indicate that. But there's also stuff happening at the level of sample pitch. At the level of sample speed, it doesn't look like there's much happening for channel 2, but there you go, you have a little change there. And for grain size. So there are basically 4 different modulations just at the level of the sampler that are happening right now. Let's stop this and look at how you might rein this in a bit. Now, if you wanted to limit your hits to a single sample, you could take and bring this range down to basically 0 for sample selection. That means it would be moving within a range of a single sample. But if we get this going, what we hear is that it is transposing that sample. It's playing the same sample, but it's transposing it downward because this sample pitch is activated. So we could do the same thing here. Bring that pitch down to 0, and now it is playing the same hit no matter what velocity we're playing for that channel. So that's a way of reining in and getting a sense for exactly what is going on in this modulation section, or in the sampler control section. It also applies for the effect control. But that's not all, of course, because there's also an LFO for each one of these sections that can be sent to the individual parameters that we have. So sample selection, pitch, speed, grain. So you could have both the velocity of the hits modulating and this LFO if you wanted to get really wacky. But if you just want to hear exactly what's going on with the sampler without the modulation, you can bring these down to 0. But an even faster way to do this is just to click mod off in this middle section. This will turn off all the modulation. And then let's get a different snapshot here. So we'll go from something like that to this, where there's not as much modulation happening. Actually, in this snapshot, there's not a whole lot of modulation to begin with. It might be better to take a different snapshot. This one has a healthy amount of modulation. Now we'll turn the modulation off. And now you hear that it's basically playing the same sample for each of these channels, right? Each channel, it's one sample. And it's not altering the pitch, the speed, or the grain size. So if you just want to use this purely for its sample map and a programming capacity, that's the way to do that. So that is the second thing. Now the third thing is a sample map functionality that I want to show you that I think is a lot of fun to use with your own samples. Now one thing I neglected to mention in the last segment is that you can easily change any of these parameters by drawing in data. You set this input function to DRW, which is draw. And then if you go to a particular parameter, and let's say use this Targo snapshot, I'm going to solo track 5 or channel 5. This is how it is currently. Now, as I did in the last section, I'm going to bring the range down to 0. And then if I have draw selected, I can just bring this up or down to audition different samples. So in that way, I can basically choose different samples for some of the pre-existing sequences. Very cool. Choose a different one-shot. Speaking of one-shots, this is a sample map that is full of great one-shots. There are, let's see, 100 samples in here. But what if we wanted to change this up and, say, load a different sample map? I have the sample map from Reaktor's Massive already saved to my system, and if you need help doing this or learning how to save sample maps, you can take the how to build a sampler in Reaktor course, which is free. It's at Blue Water VST. It will show you how to do this, and you'll learn a lot of other stuff to boot. So now we have loaded the Massive sample map, and this one is actually much smaller than Krypt's sample map. This one goes from 64 to 85. Now there is a very handy feature in the sampler, which is a set of fields for first and last sample. Right now it's set from 0 to 99, which is, of course, Krypt's original sample map, is the range for Krypt's original sample map. But we can change this up to the range of our new sample map by clicking on this and dragging up to 64, bringing this back down to 85, and now we will be playing Reaktor Massive samples with Krypt. We can unsolo this, and it's doing all the same modulation, everything it was doing before, and we can move through here. But one thing to bear in mind is that if you change the sequencer and the sampler at the same time, that sampler will revert back to these values for Krypt's sample map. So you might want to just change the sequencer and leave the sample map first and last in there. Kind of like that one. Massive, of course, tends to have some kind of houseier sounding samples, so this is a great way of using this in tandem with Krypt's wacky modulation. And Krypt also has some nice shuffle capability as well. Now, if you'd like to go deeper with Krypt, I've posted a bonus video at bluewatervst.com. The link to that post is in the description here. Simply sign up for the email list on the right sidebar. Wait for the pop-up to come up. You'll get access to the free How to Build a Sampler in Reaktor course, as well as a bunch of great bonus videos. So, hope that's of interest, guys. Take care. I'll talk to you again next week.